Hello, good morning, and welcome to those of you joining the session this morning. We are glad to have you here today for our CSR Marketplace Live session with Submittable on principles, tactics, and tools for measuring the impact of corporate grants. We're going to give everybody just a minute to join the Zoom room. While you're coming in, if you want to migrate over to the chat and introduce yourself, just tell us your name and where you're joining from or which company you're with. It's nice for us to see who's on the line today. So while you're joining, go ahead and migrate over to chat and say hello. We will be getting started in just a minute as soon as everybody has had an opportunity to join. I see our numbers growing, so we did have plenty of people registered today, so we'll give everybody just a minute. But welcome to our CSR Marketplace Live session on principles, tactics, and tools for measuring the impact of corporate grants. We'll get started in just a minute, but if you would go ahead and migrate over to the chat and just introduce yourself. You see Keriann's introduced herself in the chat. Just go ahead and say hello. Tell us where you're joining from today so we can see who's on the line with us. So we are glad to have you all here for this CSR Marketplace Live presentation with Submittable. This is part of our CSR Marketplace Live pre-conference event in advance of our annual conference in December. And we are running these sessions with our CSR partners in the field, and we appreciate and thank Submittable for their support and their participation and are glad to learn from them today. We are going to be in Zoom, as you all know. We are pretty familiar with it, but just going to go over the features that we'll be using today. The first is live transcript. If that is helpful for you, we have that feature turned on. You can look at the bottom of your screen for that live transcript button. You can view the full transcript or the subtitles, or if that's distracting, you can hide the subtitles, but you have that feature available if that is helpful. We will be using the chat. You guys are already in it. Thank you for saying hello and letting us know who you are and where you're from. If you haven't had an opportunity, go ahead and do that now. Make sure to change the arrow down there to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your information. Throughout the session, we welcome you to engage in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and add your thoughts, piggyback on what's being said, share information with other attendees. We encourage that throughout the session. We will be making time for questions today. We'll be using the Q&A box to capture those questions. So at any point during the session, you can go ahead and add a question. Keriann and Natalya will be monitoring that, and we'll take those questions as it's appropriate, either through the session or at the end. So if you have a question at any time, feel free to enter it into the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to get to all of those before we end. As I mentioned, the CSR Marketplace Live is a pre-conference event, and so we look forward to seeing you all in conjunction with our annual conference, December 7th through 9th. If you are registered, we are looking forward to seeing you. If not, you can get more information on our website there. So let's turn our attention to this particular session. Again, we are glad to have Submittable here with us today. Natalya DeRobertis-Theye and Keriann Strickland are our speakers for today, and we are interested in what you all have to tell us about measuring impact. So Keriann and Natalya, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks for the intro, Erica. We're happy to be here and join you all today. You can go ahead and skip on to the agenda, Natalya. So here's a little bit about what we're going to cover today. It's a huge topic with a lot of interest and facets to it, but we'll take you through a brief intro, and then we're going to try and hit on several key principles that we feel like we've seen organizations successfully use to do this work well. And on each of those, we'll try and ground it a little bit with a couple of tactics and tools that match up to that higher, loftier principle. We have some resources to help at the end, but like Erica said, we really welcome questions, chat, or comments throughout the presentation. It's hard. That's maybe the one thing I really miss about traveling to in-person presentations is the nonverbal feedback and the ability to have more conversational presentations with folks. I feel like sometimes that's lost online, but it's really awesome to be able to gather with people, it looks like from chat all over the country, and to be here with you all today. So please chime in, participate, let us know what your questions are. We'll also save some time at the end of the presentation for that. You want to go ahead, Natalya?
Yeah.
So to introduce our team, why are Natalya and I here today with you? We're not academics. We didn't write the book on social impact, and there literally are books on it. And we're not in the field doing, corporate grants like many of you are. But at Submittable, we have the privilege to see thousands of clients doing that work. And our entire company is dedicated to creating a software that makes it easy, efficient, and as effective as possible from start to finish. So, while we aren't out in the field itself, we learn so much from our clients and soak in their best practices and learnings, and are lucky to have that seat where we get to view a lot of different practices. We're also really lucky to be able to spend a lot of our day immersed in the ways that philanthropy is evolving. Sam Kaplan, our VP of Social Impact, likes to say that finally grantee-based philanthropy has taken root. And we've learned so much from him, others like the TrustBased Philanthropy Project, and many others who will say throughout the presentation today.
So I wanted to, for those of you who maybe have not seen it, CECP's Giving You Numbers 2021 report just came out earlier this week. So I know we all know why we measure the impact of our social impact programs, such as corporate grants, but it's just a good reminder to see here that 92% of corporations are measuring the impact of those grants. And there's a little bit more information on which grants they're measuring. So the majority of the grants that are really being measured mostly are for a strategic program, 28% all grants, and some other information there. And here's a little bit more about what these companies, the companies surveyed, identified as the biggest benefits of those grants. You can see increased employee engagement score is the major one here on the left. As well as improved reputation, improved brand perception, and attracting and retaining the best candidates. So just a little bit of a reminder of why this is so important from a business perspective, right? And not only from a perspective of contributing to communities, which of course is something that I know we all care about very much.
Yeah, and we hear year after year that our clients are really focused on this work. So you can see here that 86% of customers who we surveyed, they were saying that they were using the reporting tools that we have specifically around these areas to measure impact, looking at data analysis, insights or trends, answering stakeholder questions, really trying to get that full view so you can make data-driven decisions. You continue on, Natalya. The other portion of this, a lot of them, 2/3 say that in our last survey that they really were focused on reaching their DEI goals, and that they were able to use the software to run a more inclusive process, more objectivity, and create new opportunities specifically to meet their goals. So that's a little bit, piggybacking off of that data that Natalya was showing. We also are hearing this over and over from customers that these are some of the key important things to them.
And one of our principals will touch specifically on equity today. So I like to include this slide on the topic of social impact. This is from a South Park episode. It's just kind of to lighten the mood, but I find it so apt. It's kind of a joke on a logic model, right? Like, where you're starting with this grant, and where you want to go, where you want to make your impact. And this impact measurement is kind of what's in this phase too. It's like, but how do you get there? And so part of the idea behind these principles that we're going to share with you today is that you might not always know exactly what metrics you need to look at or who you need to be surveying and when and how, but by following these principles, it'll kind of help guide you into the right direction. So here are the principles that we're going to discuss. We're going to go over each principle, kind of give a little bit of background and what it means to us, and what we've kind of where that learning came from. And then we'll sort of discuss some tactics and tools that make it the principle kind of help you think about how you can pragmatically apply it in your day-to-day work. So the principles we'll be looking at today are: prioritize the work, do your part, center people, embrace the complexity, think holistically, be humble, and apply an equity lens.
And before we jump into those, I think we had a poll that we were going to put up. I don't know
Right.
if our ACCP partners could do that. Thank you. And this is, we'd love to hear a little bit more about who we're speaking to, right? So a couple of questions here about what type of work you're doing, so that maybe we can match some of what we discuss as we go through the presentation to the folks in the room.
Thank you so much, Keriann.
Give that just a moment while you reply to that, and then we'll hop into the first one.
So I'm seeing almost everyone offering grants, lots of volunteering and event sponsorships as well. And just one more question here. We're curious from what seat within your company you do your work.
Yeah, we often find with our corporate partners that this can really vary, right, where this lives within the organization. And I think it can, change how you approach the work itself.
If you did say other, please feel free to chime in the chat and let us know which department you're in. But looks like a majority of other and corporate foundation. All right, thank you so much. And I'll go ahead and dive into this first principle. So principle number one is prioritize the work. And there's a reason that this is the first one. You're funding grantees so that they can do the work of administering a program, or their nonprofit doing their work in the communities. And it's so that they can make a positive difference through that time spent in their communities. Definitely not so that they can spend an inordinate amount of time filling out your questionnaires and jumping through hoops, trying to come up with a million little data points to help you measure. So if you keep the mission of your grant making organization and the work itself as your North Star, that can help you determine whether you're asking a useful question in your measurement that's helping you meet those overall goals. So the way that I heard Shadi Salehi of the TrustBased Philanthropy Project put it in conversation with my colleague Rachel Mindell earlier this year in a webinar is that if you can take your grantee's point of view to help you determine if you're really asking a valuable question. So you always want to begin here. So moving on to some tactics and tools for this one. A tactic can definitely be surveying your team. Asking your team, I heard this, I can't actually remember where I heard this in a webinar earlier this year, but taking the time, maybe you have an impact questionnaire you've used for a really long time, and you're not really sure if people on your team are using all of that information. So ask your team, do you need this information? Is this something that you use in your work in some way? Or, is this valuable to us? And if it's not, you can drop it. Related to that is only asking for what you need. So really making an effort to only think about gathering the information that really is valuable for you in terms of, reporting on your impact to your stakeholders, and not just gathering data for the sake of data. Next, don't ask for what you already have. God forbid. There are some tools that can help with that one, but it really, take responsibility and make sure that you're only asking every question of each grantee once. And make it easy and convenient, right? So the more burden that you put on your grantees, the harder it is for them to report to you, the less time they're able to spend on their important work. So finding a way to make it really easy and convenient. So some specific tools, an easy to use online portal for your applicants, allowing for collaboration tools so that, particularly in today's remote environment, when people are distributed throughout the country or the world, giving them easy ways that they can collaborate with each other through those online portals. looking for an editable software, right? God forbid someone has to request that they can retract something and then resubmit it and go through all of these hoops just because, one data point changed or they omitted something or they just need to get something fixed. They made a mistake. And lastly, a software for you for where you're gathering your impact reports, where all of your application material and follow-up material is housed like right together. And what that really helps you do is put some of these tactics to work, right? You don't have to ask for the same question again because you have it easily accessible. So just a quick example here, this is submittable, right? And you can see how you've got your original application right here and all of your additional forms, your eligibility forms, and they're all easily organized for you in one place so that you can find them and you don't have to ask again or go digging through somewhere else. Moving on here, our next principle is do your part. So do your part here means to take on what reporting burden yourself that is reasonable and possible for you. That can be, doing research and doing due diligence and taking on the task of finding anything that's available online, for example. But it can also mean things such as, we increasingly see trends in verbal reporting. So if you're doing a verbal report, at the 6-month mark, for example, can you take on the responsibility of recording that conversation and then later uploading it to your grant management software? Another example from Shadi Salehi of the TrustBased Philanthropy Project, she mentioned how she had seen some impact surveys where funders were asking their grantees about their COVID responses. But in almost all of those cases, the information about COVID responses were like readily available on the nonprofit websites. So that's the kind of thing that you don't need to be asking about. You can just get your team out there and finding it yourself. So looking at some tactics, again, answering what you can, inputting data or files yourself, learning how you can help. So, surveying your grantees and saying, what is it that you need help with in terms of these impact metrics that we're asking about, and how can we help you to get those? Taking action on feedback when you get it. Definitely don't make the mistake of requesting feedback and then receiving it and then doing nothing, right? Nothing looks worse or feels worse than that from a grantee point of view. And enlisting external evaluators here. That's something that we've seen at the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation in New York. And that helps, they use an external evaluator to help evaluate, to listen into phone calls and assess how they're progressing toward their trust building goals. So some tools here, allowing for your team members to input data. So just a quick example here, this is an internal form for Submittable. I guess you can see it here as well. And this is a place where, for example, I can go ahead and upload that verbal transcript, right, that I was saying earlier, an integration with Candid or GuideStar. So one way that you can see that is just asking for an EIN number and then pulling all of that data right into your system. So that way your team doesn't have to look it up, but your grantees don't have to provide that information either. All they have to give you is their EIN number and you can pull all of that data on the back end. And again, using external evaluators, that the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation is just one example, but your organization has access to resources that your grantees most likely don't have. So checking in with them and seeing what support they can use and finding out how you can help to provide that support that they need.
This theme here is to center people. I think it's really kind of pulling us out of the mindset when we approach impact reporting to think about not just the data-driven side of it, but also the creative and storytelling side. I think some of the most exciting impact reporting work that we've seen has actually come from people who have really excelled at helping their beneficiaries tell their own stories. And so it's important to remember to not replace this dynamic human experience with just a data point, the data is awesome, but it's also equally, and I think sometimes much more powerful to have stories from those that you're supporting. Centering people means keeping the human element of this work always front of mind. And at the Yale Philanthropy Conference, one thing we've been thinking about is a quote from Una Asili, who said, when you bring the data to life through stories, it can inspire and move people to action and can also be part of learning. If you go ahead, Natalya, I started my career in journalism, and I feel like this always speaks to my recovering reporter, newspaper loving heart to hear this part of the storytelling. But some of the ways that we've seen people do this work really well is by asking open-ended questions in their impact reporting, right? Choosing ways to ask that help support people, looking for opportunities to hear directly from the community members of participating in your project, and then sharing those quotes and testimonials and working them into your stories. I think one of the most exciting ways we've seen this done, on the right there, you see support for diverse file types. So if your impact reporting tools allow you to accept different types of files, I'd really encourage you to think about how you might include video in your process. We've seen some amazing work come out of the ability to have people even take a quick cell phone video or walk around their community and actually show the impact of the work. You can get an amazing and very different view of a program than what you would get from just a written statement or a checkbox sort of impact report. And I think the other thing that it allows for is organizations who maybe don't excel as much in the written portion of grant writing and reporting, but do really excel at delivering impact to their community and doing that, boots on the ground work. Sometimes opening up that file type option allows for different voices and stories to get told in that manner that normally might not communicate or get, see their way through. We had one foundation that I remember telling us that they added video, and this was actually on the front end of their application, the option to tell the story visually. And he told me that it 100% changed the group of applicants, the pool of applicants that they had, and did not expect that, right? That change alone would really diversify and change the people who are submitting to their program. If you want to go ahead, Natalya. I'm seeing it. I want to pause for questions here too. I'm looking, is marketing usually involved in storytelling with the nonprofit, or is it mostly CSR teams? Are there best practices for connecting all three? That is a meaty and awesome question. I do think getting your marketing involved can be really beneficial. I know at Submittable, our marketing team, CSR, kind of sits in our space as well, along with HR. And for us, that practice usually, and what I see with clients is usually finding ways to one, be really clear when the CSR program is happening, giving marketing opportunities to maybe get involved early. I think with your impact reporting, you might be focused on proving the financial impact or more data-driven benefit of a program, but marketing could maybe come in on this storytelling aspect. So as you create your impact reports, maybe having a check-in or touch base so that both sides are getting the type of visuals or information that they might need. We have a really talented videographer on our team, but the way Jordan approaches storytelling is going to be really different than the way Natalya, who generally communicates via written word, is going to approach that story. And I think together, kind of bringing in some of those minds can be really helpful. The other question we have in, go ahead, Natalya.
Just to add on to that point, I agree, that's such an interesting question. For those of you who are interested in kind of following more trust-based practices, we mentioned the TrustBased Philanthropy project a few times. We're really interested in amplifying and sharing the ways that corporations and other grant makers can follow more trust-based practices. Like, it's just such an exciting thing to see happening in the sector. And I would say from a trust-based approach, when it comes to working with your grantees and nonprofits in, providing those resources, such as, marketing resources, which often may be a need, just make sure that you're in dialogue with those grantees. Ask them how they can support you, or maybe offer that support, but be careful to not assume that that is desired from you, right? It may be that they have a particular way that they'd like to tell their own story, and it might not align exactly with what you had in mind. So, over time, building that strong relationship with your grantees will help that to become an easier, more natural, give and take in conversation. But particularly if you're just kind of starting to dabble in more of a trust-based way and looking to offer that support, I would, be mindful that just because you have resources and you'd like to share them doesn't necessitate that all of your grantees are going to want exactly what you would want to provide. So do be mindful of that.
The other question, one of them that we have down here, Natalya, is around corporations and profits often use different terminology for impact. Are you seeing organizations standardizing that language for easier reporting? Sort of. I actually would say I see a lot of difference, not just between corporations and nonprofits, but within both of those spaces of how people approach terminology, both on their application side and on their impact reporting side. I think what I've been excited to see is there is more movement toward, Fix the Form on the nonprofit side was a really strong movement this past year that aimed at identifying duplication or looking for, a similar sort of application experience, which I do think speaks to terminology. We have a podcast coming out. Did it come out this week, Natalya?
It came out on Tuesday. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Thank you.
Well.
I was it's either this past Tuesday or next Tuesday. I didn't know if I was saying it too soon, but that's with John Moore from the MacArthur Foundation. And he actually talks quite a bit about some of the efforts to potentially, unify around a common application. And I think that would be a really great listen if you're interested in that work.
Yeah, absolutely. One more note on that. I believe that TAG provided, Technology Association of Grantmakers, provided an analysis of hundreds of forms that were kind of volunteered by different foundations and corporations. And they found, I think it was a 39% similarity. And so that's part of the momentum that's behind moving toward a more common application, which, again, would make some progress toward standardizing some terminology. I'll also just mention on that topic, you're brave for looking at that question, Keriann. I was pretty intimidated by it. There's a whole the appendices in that giving and numbers report that I just sent out is almost as long as the report itself. So if you are interested in kind of digging into some more technical kind of information and terminology, it provides lots of definitions. So that's at least one example of defining the different kind of terminology and, in terms of what does impact mean in this case. So that might be a place to dig in if you're curious.
And a final note there before I go into this next one. One spot I have seen people be more conscious of at least making their own terminology more consistent and doing that year over year, so that many of our clients might work with repeat applicants, right? And they have multi-year partnerships with their grantees. So the more stable and consistent they can make their own process can have a real impact on their grantees, not having to rewrite or switch things up or do that, or being a little bit more flexible and open-ended on, hey, did you do this report for something else already? Just submit that one to me. It'll be fine. We'll use that data. We'll let you know if anything's missing that we need extra. I think sometimes providing that sort of flexibility or grace to take it in an existing format means that a grants manager doesn't have to spend a ton of time reworking the same thing.
Yeah, and that actually speaks to this other question that we've got here. What changes have you seen your clients make to their process and requests after conversations with their community partners? That is great example of one that Keriann just made. You're not going to be the only funder for all of your different grantees, right? They're working with multiple funders, and some of them are going to be requiring, most of them probably are going to be requiring them to create a report. So why not just take that same report, and most likely the report that they prepared for a different funder will have all of the same information that you need. Another major trend that we're seeing that I mentioned already is verbal reporting. Sam Kaplan, Submittable's VP of Social Impact in particular, is following this one really closely. But doing verbal check-ins at various points in the process not only helps you build your relationships, but you can just get a fuller picture of how things are really going when you just kind of have a casual conversation about it. And you can use tools such as transcription software, or taking your own notes or recording that call, so that you can still retain that data. But it just totally reduces the burden on the grantee, and it just really gives you a different perspective of how things are actually going on the ground. So those are two trends I would definitely call out.
Well, these are such good questions.
Yes, keep them coming. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, I'm going to keep going here. I know we're a little tight on time, so embrace the complexity. This one we put in, impact is complex. It involves outputs and outcomes, which means that some results can be seen in the short term and some can be seen in the long term. The thing that we really want to highlight here is that as you're collecting impact data, resist the temptation to look for a really neat linear story or strictly quantitative data points like impact per dollar. Almost all significant efforts towards social change are more complex than that. And I think we all know that, but it can be really easy to get into that reporting mindset. Another one from the Yale Philanthropy Conference, this was Neil Buddy Shaw, but his quote there was, "You risk good ideas failing when organizations and donors run an impact evaluation that's too rigorous, too early." So thinking about in your process where you're checking in and where it makes sense to apply that rigor, I think can be really helpful in not judging something a failure too soon. Here, we have a couple of different tactics and tools around that, considering the timing, being willing to do some risk taking. Yeah, oh God, this question's great too. We'll get to that. So, considering that timing, seeing the benefits of risk taking, I think this is another to the question I'm seeing. It's about helping senior leaders understand and appreciate the complexity of this work. I also think helping them understand the benefits of risk taking is another one. Celebrating learnings and growth. And some of the tools that we see folks do that is additional forms. So, follow-up tools that allow you to collect information later in your process, and then reporting tools that help you do some of the base reporting work, which means you don't have to collect that information from your grantees. I've had success sometimes in the past of, depending on your corporation, but I think many businesses are this way. Obviously, we work in tech and we fail all the time. Like, that's sort of built into our ethos in learning. It's that we don't fail the same way repeatedly is incredibly important, and that we learn from it and we improve and iterate. And I think that I've had success talking to leadership and communicating some of this work in that way of why would we apply a different expectation or principle toward this work than we do toward maybe our own, and our willingness to learn and experiment and grow in that work than we do here. So Natalya, I'll let you go to the next one.
Okay. Yeah, that's such a good question about senior leadership. One more point I would throw to that is it's a really exciting time in the field right now, where I think that more and more organizations are, organizations with like a lot of influence, whether foundations or corporations, are really starting to adopt some of these principles. So maybe pointing toward some of your peers in the field who are doing that work and doing it well, and seeing better results as over time might be a helpful place to start. Okay, so think holistically here. So programs do not exist in a vacuum, and a holistic mindset can apply both to the issue that you are looking to tackle. For example, let's say you're focused on childhood hunger in your community, but it can also apply to your larger grant making program. So there are themes that can be gleaned and lessons to be learned across the spectrum that can help and inform related work. You might learn lessons from some of your grantees that would apply to your other grantees. That could be a lesson for you as a grant maker, or it could be a lesson that you can kind of pass on to your other grantees that you've seen other nonprofits learn that can be helpful for them as well. And part of this holistic mindset is taking attribution into account. So seeing your work as a grant maker in the larger context of, activities by other organizations and individuals who you might be actively partnering with. There could be activities by other entities independent of your efforts, but with the same or overlapping goals or results. There could also be people working who maybe have goals that are contrary to your goals. And then, of course, there are macroeconomic, political, public health, forces of nature, all kinds of things influence outcomes. So some tactics to think about here, considering both outputs and outcomes, projects and programs. So this was a reminder from Sam Kaplan at Submittable. There's a difference between how is a project going and are we achieving our mission? So kind of thinking about and holding on to both of those and recognizing that sometimes they could be independent of each other, right? A project could be going well, even though the mission is not being served, or vice versa. Next is to look at both micro and macro outcomes. And what I think about here is you want to learn about your individual grantees, but you also want to apply lessons to your larger organization. Next is sharing insights. Again, you could be in a position as a funder to share learnings that you've taken from one nonprofit with your other nonprofits, or feedback that you've gotten from one nonprofit might actually apply to every organization that you're working with. And lastly, here is considering context. So again, just as a simple, obvious example, let's say that you were funding a food bank, right? And hunger went up in 2020. Well, we all know that that was because of a global pandemic, right? And it's not necessarily that your work for the food bank wasn't helpful in making things better. There was a larger situation happening, and your work was probably even more important than ever. So some tools that can help here. A data aggregation tool is a great way that you can learn lessons across your grant making organization. It's a quick example of Submittable's impact reports as a data aggregator. Just really kind of brings things to the forefront. And one of my favorite things about this tool is that it also helps aggregate your qualitative data. There's also, you can think about ways that you can gather data in different formats through video and audio, and kind of aggregating all of that into a way for you to learn lessons across your organization. In-app communication is a great way that you can make sure that you're staying in touch with your grantees and kind of gathering all of that information and kind of, pursuing like a more open communication and larger relationship. And again, you can use an external evaluator. If you're looking to really get an idea of attribution and, some of those like media really hard to measure pieces of impact, you can use an external evaluator. And I want to say that that Giving in Numbers report that I was looking at, the vast majority of the measurement work that we saw happening was corporate grant makers leveraging tools that they were already using in order to measure the impact of those grants. So that might be existing employee surveys or questionnaires. And it was also, working with external, consultants or firms that were, for example, measuring their brand reputation, things like that. Okay, next is be humble. I'm going to go quickly through these last two here, but remember that, you might not have all of the right answers all of the time, even if you've been in the industry for a while. One important thing to remember is, your definition of success might not always match your grantee's definition of success. So it's important to check in on that. A quick quote from Tanya Fair from our first episode of our Impact Audio, our new podcast, she said, you can be the president of the United States and you better still be learning. And I love that. It's such a good reminder of the importance of being humble. So always be learning, use the same measurement tool the grantees are using themselves, kind of similarly to how we talked about earlier. It's okay to accept report that might have been prepared for another funder. Well, your nonprofits are creating their own reports. So maybe the reports that they create for themselves are exactly the information that you need as well. Rely on a framework. Real quickly, I'll share in the chat in just a moment, but there's several frameworks you can use, ESG, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Global Reporting Initiative standards, lots of frameworks available that you can use. Asking the grantee how they define success, pretty straightforward. And then find out how the ultimate beneficiaries define success. Quick example I saw in a blog from Vu Lei was a mentorship program, right? Let's say you're running a mentorship program and you were looking at high school graduation rates as a measure of success. But it could be that the community actually cared most about the kids' happiness, right? So just checking in and, remembering that your idea of success is not the only idea or necessarily the best idea. Some tools, again, that you can use, existing frameworks I mentioned, as well as once more support for diverse file types so that you can gather those reports that might have been prepared for someone other than you. And last one here is apply an equity lens. So, definitely related to the humility point, but just remember that traditional methods of measurement are often the result of white dominant institutions or evaluators, and they may not reflect what is valued by those doing or benefiting from the work itself. And furthermore, these traditional measures and rigid requirements typically favor white-led nonprofits. And so most of the funding, therefore, is going to go to those nonprofits who can establish their effectiveness through those same measures, and the cycle perpetuates itself. Some tactics here: be curious about how your frameworks came to be, right? Just because they've been around forever doesn't mean that they're the only way or the best way. So find out where they came from and, apply a critical lens as to whether they are still working for you. Listen and learn and act so that, again, it comes back to building that relationship with your grantees. Don't judge on grammar or professionalism. Our clients at Artist Trust gave us some great advice in a webinar that we produced earlier this year, but, they really make an effort not to just judge on grammar, because just because someone isn't necessarily the best at communicating themselves in that traditional way of grant writing doesn't mean that they're not totally worthy of being funded. And work actively for a more equitable process. I like to say that equity work is work, so you have to do the work. It's not going to do itself. And some tools that you can use are, of course, DEI trainings and assessments. Okay, I think we've got a couple of minutes left to go over some resources. We've mentioned Impact Audio a few times here. We've got these helpful QR codes if you want to use those to scan there. But this is our new podcast. We've had some really exciting conversations with people all throughout the last several months. So definitely encourage you to check that out. So Tanya Fair, John Moore are just a few. We talked with Chantel Forster of TAG as well. Lots of really exciting stuff there. Sam Kaplan, who we've also quoted a few times here, writes a bi-weekly newsletter about kind of his insights in the industry. His newsletter just this past week, for example, was about that giving in numbers report. Really recommend that you check that out. And there's another QR code there if that's a helpful way for you to follow up on that. I did go ahead and throw in our brand new guide, Measuring Social Impact, written by my colleague, Laura Steele. She made a very funny joke, guide/coffee table. It is meaty, but if you are serious about this work and you'd like some more kind of advice and really practical how to help you, definitely check that out. You can just go to submittable.com/guides and you'll see that there. Or yeah, Keriann threw it into the chat. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have a ton more
it's good
resources.
when your writer apologizes for it, when she's like, "I'm sorry you have to edit this. It's a lot there," but it's great. It's a really great resource.
Absolutely. And we will go over some questions, but I did just want to say, If you are interested in learning more about Submittable, you can go ahead and throw your contact information into the chat right now, and we'll have someone follow up with you. You can just send it, just to us panelists if you like. If you're not interested in necessarily hearing from everybody who's here on the call. Were there any more questions or anything in the chat that we can get to in the last couple of minutes here? I haven't been able to see.
Yeah, well, I just want to shout out a comment we got. I had put in, I'd love if there's other thoughts on the audience question around how to help senior leaders understand and appreciate the complexity of the work. I really liked April's answer here around, having them close to the work, serving on nonprofit boards, committees, and or being part of decision committees. I think that one's a really, really great suggestion. I know, there's nothing like, we have a local volunteering program here, and having people in the C-suite and leadership out volunteering with everyone else is really important, both to like internal company culture, but I think to them understanding and appreciating the really complex and multi-varied value of that work.
Absolutely.
Don't see any more questions. You guys did such a good job of getting to the questions throughout the presentation. So thank you for taking those audience questions as we went along. I wanted to remind everyone that we will be sending a recording of the session with the transcript, and we'll pull the resources that you all included in the chat and make sure to include that in the follow-up as well, since you all had added several things for people to follow up with. So we'll make sure that that's part of the follow-up resources too. You'll have those, all the attendees will have those by mid next week. So be on the lookout for that follow-up email. But I wanted to thank everyone for being with us today and for listening to the session. And for Keriann and Natalya, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. Really great information for folks to think about and follow up with. So thank you for being part of the CSR Marketplace Live, and thank you for your continued support of ACCP. And we appreciate you being here. We're going to post a link in the chat to a survey that would be helpful if you have a minute to fill it out. It'll also come as part of the follow-up resources, but that's helpful for everyone to have that feedback. So if those of you on the line would take a minute and fill that out, we would appreciate that. But otherwise, thank you so much, Keriann and Natalya, for being with us. And thanks to everyone for spending their morning talking about this really important topic. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much for having us.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye,
Erica.
everyone.
Bye.